The Blue Moon Diner reeked of burnt coffee and desperation in the dead of night. Aurora wiped down the same sticky table for the third time, her fingertips pruned from bleach water, her feet screaming inside worn sneakers held together with duct tape. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry wasps, casting everything in that sickly yellow glow that made even the youngest customers look half dead. She was in her late 20s and felt decades older. Aurora, table 6 needs ketchup. Brenda barked from behind the counter, her cigarette-roughened voice cutting through the late-night silence. She didn't look up from her magazine, some gossip rag about celebrities Aurora could never afford to care about. "On it," she mumbled, grabbing the plastic bottle from the condiment station. Table 6 was a young mother with hollow eyes and a little boy who couldn't have been much older than a kindergartner. The kid was drawing on the paper placemat with a stubby crayon, his tongue poking out in concentration. The woman, Lila, kept staring out the window at the empty parking lot like she was searching for someone. Her hands trembled when she reached for her coffee. Aurora had seen that look before, in her own mirror, back when Harlan used to come home with liquor on his breath and rage in his fists, back when she'd count the tiles on the bathroom floor and wonder if this would be the night he finally went too far. "Here's your ketchup," Aurora said softly, setting it down. "Can I get you anything else? Maybe some pie. It's on the house." The boy's eyes lit up. "Can we, Mama?" Lila shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "We can accept, I insist," Aurora interrupted gently. "Cherry or apple?" "Cherry!" Caleb squealed, then immediately looked guilty, like he'd been taught that joy was something to apologize for. Aurora smiled at him. "Cherry it is, sweetheart." She was heading back to the kitchen when the bell above the door chimed. The sound seemed to suck all the air out of the room. 3 men walked in, and everything about them screamed danger. The first 2 were massive, their shoulders barely fitting through the doorframe. They wore dark suits that probably cost more than months of Aurora's salary, and their eyes scanned the diner with the cold efficiency of predators. But it was the third man who made her breath catch. He moved like liquid darkness, each step deliberate and measured. His suit was black, not the cheap black of a funeral rental, but the kind of black that absorbed light even from across the room. Aurora could smell him. Expensive cologne mixed with something darker, danger, or maybe power. He had a face that belonged in old paintings, a sharp jawline, dark hair slightly curled and swept back, a faint scar above his left eyebrow, and eyes the color of storm clouds that seemed to catalog everything in a single glance. When those eyes landed on Aurora, she felt pinned like a butterfly under glass. Then they moved past her to table 6. Lila went rigid. Her coffee cup clattered against the saucer. Her face turned white as death. "No," she breathed. "No, no, no. Lila." The dark-haired man's voice was velvet wrapped around steel. He didn't raise it. Didn't need to. The single word carried more threat than a scream. "You've been avoiding my calls?" "Please," she whispered. "Please, I just need more time." "Time?" He moved closer, and Aurora noticed how everyone else in the diner suddenly found their plates fascinating. No one dared to look. No one dared to breathe too loudly. "Your boyfriend stole from me. $500,000. Did you think there wouldn't be consequences?" Caleb had stopped drawing. His crayon hovered over the placemat, his small body frozen in fear. His big round eyes glistened with tears. "I didn't know," Lila said, tears streaming down her face. "I swear I didn't know what Harlan was doing. Ignorance isn't innocence." The man gestured, and one of his companions stepped forward. "You'll come with us. We'll discuss repayment terms." "No." Lila stood abruptly, positioning herself between the men and her son. Her thin body trembled, but didn't retreat. "Please, not in front of Caleb. He's just a baby." "Then you should have thought about that before you chose a thief." Aurora's body moved before her brain caught up. She stepped between them and the table, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Her legs shook like they wanted to buckle, But she stood there anyway, blocking the path between the Mafia boss and the terrified mother and child. She said no. The silence that followed was deafening. Up close, the man was even more terrifying. He towered over her by nearly a head, his broad shoulders blocking the light behind him. His gray eyes looked down at her with an expression of utter disbelief, as if she'd just sprouted a second head. "Excuse me?" His voice was dangerously soft. I said, Aurora's voice cracked. She took a breath, forced steel into it. She said, "No, so you need to leave." One of his companions laughed, a sound like gravel in a garbage disposal. "Boss, you want me to?" The dark-haired man raised one hand, and the laughter died instantly. He studied Aurora with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Do you have any idea who I am?" "I know you're scaring a child." Aurora gestured to Caleb, who was now crying silently, tears running down his round cheeks. "So, whatever business you have, take it outside." "Aurora, don't!" Lila grabbed her arm, her fingers digging in desperately. "Don't! They'll kill you." "The girl is smart," the man said, his eyes never leaving Aurora. "You should listen to her." "Or what?" The words tumbled out before Aurora could stop them. "You'll shoot me in front of witnesses." "In front of a kid?" Something flickered in his eyes. "Surprise, maybe? Or interest?" "No," he said slowly. "I wouldn't waste a bullet on someone so insignificant." The words should have stung. Instead, they made Aurora angry. "Then leave them alone. She's not responsible for what her boyfriend did. She benefited from it. That makes her complicit. She's a victim. She's a loose end." They stared at each other. Aurora could feel the weight of his power pressing down on her like a physical thing. This was a man who was used to being obeyed, who probably hadn't heard the word no in years. She should have backed down, should have apologized, and returned to wiping tables, pretending she hadn't seen anything, but she'd spent too many years making herself small. "Well, she's under my protection now," Aurora said, lifting her chin. "So if you want her, you'll have to go through me." The man's eyebrow lifted fractionally. "Your protection?" "That's right." "And who exactly are you? Someone who's not afraid of you." It was a lie, of course. Aurora was absolutely terrified. Her legs felt like water, and her hands were shaking so badly she had to clasp them behind her back. But he didn't need to know that. For a long moment he just looked at her. Then, incredibly, his lips curved into something that might have been a smile. It didn't reach his eyes. "Brave," he murmured. "Or incredibly stupid. Probably both." He tilted his head, studying her like she was a puzzle he couldn't quite figure out. "What's your name?" "Why do you care?" "Because I like to know the names of people who interest me. I'm not interested in interesting you." Too late. The air between them crackled with tension. Behind her, Aurora could hear Lila's ragged breathing, Caleb's muffled sobs. Brenda had disappeared into the kitchen, probably calling the cops, though Aurora doubted they'd arrive in time to matter. "Last chance," the man said. "Step aside." "No," he sighed. And for the first time since he'd walked in, Aurora saw something like regret cross his features. "You really should have." The front door exploded inward. Glass rained down like deadly confetti as 4 men in masks burst in, guns drawn. Aurora heard Brenda scream from the kitchen, heard Lila shriek and grab Caleb, but mostly she heard the gunshot. It happened in slow motion and at lightning speed simultaneously. She saw the masked man's fingers squeeze the trigger, saw the muzzle flash, saw the bullet heading straight for Caleb's small head as Lila tried to shield him. Aurora didn't think. She just moved. Her body slammed into Caleb and Lila, taking them both down to the floor. She felt the impact of the bullet like a sledgehammer to her shoulder, felt the burn that spread through her entire arm and chest. The diner tilted sideways, and suddenly she was on the ground, the linoleum cold against her cheek. More gunshots, screaming, the sound of bodies hitting the floor. Then silence. Aurora tried to breathe, but her lungs wouldn't cooperate. Something warm and wet was spreading across her chest, soaking into her uniform. Her vision blurred, darkened at the edges. Someone grabbed her face, tilting it up. Storm gray eyes filled her vision. "Stay with me," the dark-haired man commanded. His voice seemed to come from very far away. "Do you hear me? Stay with me." Aurora tried to answer, but blood bubbled past her lips instead of words. "Get the car!" he barked to someone. "Now!" Strong arms lifted her, cradling her against a chest that smelled like expensive cologne and gunpowder. She felt movement, heard the crunch of glass under shoes. "Why?" she heard him mutter, and she wasn't sure if he was talking to her or himself. "Why would you do that?" "Because someone had to," Aurora wanted to say. "Because I was tired of being powerless." But the darkness was pulling her down, and she couldn't fight it anymore. The last thing she heard was his voice, rough with something that might have been fear. "You don't get to die. Do you understand me? You don't get to die, then nothing. Will Aurora survive? And who is this mysterious man really? The story has only just begun. If your heart is beating a little faster right now, leave a like so I know you're here. Share this video with someone who needs a story that touches the soul. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss what happens next. Aurora woke up drowning. That was the first sensation she could name. Her lungs were burning, her throat was closing, and something heavy was pressing down on her chest, making it impossible to draw even one full breath. She tried to thrash, tried to break the surface of the invisible water that was swallowing her, but her body would not obey. Her arms and legs were leaden, foreign, as if they belonged to someone else. A steady beeping sounded from somewhere, cold, measured, mixed with the low hum of machines and the chaos of voices she could not understand. She is in shock. Someone said, urgent and distant, as if the words were echoing from the end of a tunnel. "Call the doctor right now." Aurora tried to open her eyes, but her eyelids were so heavy it felt like stones had been placed on them. She tried to speak, but her throat was dry and raw, and something blocked it. Hard, cold. It made her gag. Panic rose like a tidal wave. She fought harder, survival screaming through every cell. She did not know where she was. She did not know what had happened. She only knew she could not breathe and she was about to die. Hands held her down. Strong, but not brutal. "Miss Reed, you need to stay calm." A woman's voice, warm and professional. "You're safe. Can you hear me? You're safe. Safe." The word meant nothing. Nothing was safe. Memories slammed into her like shattered glass. Sharp, chaotic. The diner. Shallow fluorescent light. Lila and Caleb. A man with storm gray eyes. The bell over the door. Men in masks. Gunfire. Caleb. She had seen the bullet aimed at the boy. She had thrown herself forward. And then pain. Pain so deep she thought she would break into a million pieces. Her chest, her shoulder, blood, hot and wet, soaking through her uniform, the cold floor against her cheek, and those gray eyes. The eyes of the terrifying man suddenly filled with something she could not name. "You cannot die." His voice rang inside her memory, rough and almost desperate. "You are not allowed to die." Aurora stopped struggling, not because she was calm, because she had no strength left. Her body was wrecked, every muscle ached, every breath was a battle. The beeping slowed. Steadier now. The hands on her shoulders loosened. "Good." The woman's voice softened. "Just like that. Breathe slowly. You're doing very well." But Aurora did not feel like she was doing well. She felt herself sinking, slowly, unstoppably down into a bottomless pit. She wanted to ask, was Caleb all right? Was Lila all right? But language had left her. All that remained was darkness, thick, total, pulling her under again. And this time, Aurora did not fight it. She let it swallow her, taking the pain, the fear, and the unanswered question about the man with storm eyes, the man who had carried her in his arms and ordered her to live. The second time Aurora opened her eyes, she thought she was dreaming. The ceiling above her was not the kind of hospital ceiling she expected. Not cold white, not cheap plastic tiles, not harsh fluorescent lights. Instead, it was a work of art. Fine gold lines curling in elegant detail, classical motifs carefully hand-painted, and in the center, a massive crystal chandelier. Thousands of tiny prisms catching the light and scattering it into faint rainbows across the cream-colored walls. Aurora blinked once, twice. The ceiling was still there, dazzling and unfamiliar in a way that made no sense. She tried to sit up and regretted it instantly. Pain tore from her left shoulder down across her chest, so fierce she almost screamed. A groan escaped instead, and she collapsed back into the pillow, gasping slowly. "Sweetheart, do not try to move too fast." The voice came from her right. Aurora turned her head, slower this time, and saw a middle-aged woman sitting in an armchair beside the bed. Her red hair threaded with silver was pinned neatly at the nape of her neck. Her green eyes were warm, and her smile belonged to someone who had seen too much in life and still chose kindness anyway. She wore a light blue nurse's uniform, but she did not look like she belonged to any public hospital. "My name is Clara, but everyone calls me Clara." She stood and placed a cool hand on Aurora's forehead. "Your fever is down." "Good. You had us worried these past days." Days. Aurora tried to swallow, but her throat felt like desert sand. Clara seemed to understand at once. She reached for the glass on the table and brought the straw to Aurora's lips. Aurora took small sips. The cool water soothed the burning in her throat. "Days?" Aurora asked, her voice rough. "Days, sweetheart. You were in a coma for days. The bullet went through your lung, nearly hit your heart, and your collarbone is broken." Clara set the glass down. Her tone was gentle but practical. "You are very lucky. Either someone up there is watching you, or you are so stubborn, even death gave up." Days. Aurora let it sink in, trying to arrange the shattered pieces of memory. The diner, Lila, Caleb, the bullet, the boy. Aurora jerked upright, ignoring the pain, and grabbed Clara's wrist. "Caleb, is he all right? And Lila, his mother, she—" "Calm down, calm down." Clara gently freed Aurora's grip and pressed her back onto the pillows. "They are both safe." The boy was not hurt, only frightened. His mother has a few minor scrapes. They are somewhere safe. Relief rushed through Aurora like warm water. She did not know why she cared so much about two strangers, but she knew that if anything had happened to Caleb, she would never have forgiven herself. When the panic finally loosened its grip, Aurora truly looked around the room for the first time, and what she saw made her stop breathing. This room was 3 times the size of her miserable studio apartment. The bed beneath her was a king-size bed with an elaborately carved wooden frame and cream silk sheets that felt impossibly soft. The curtains were deep red velvet, heavy, luxurious. The furniture was antique, the kind Aurora only saw in museums or in glossy home magazines she flipped through while waiting in line at the grocery store. On the bedside table to her left, beside medicine bottles and medical equipment, sat a vase of white roses. The flowers were so perfect they looked carved from porcelain. Not a single petal creased, tiny beads of dew still clinging to them. No card, no note, just the roses, pure white, silent. "This is not a hospital," Aurora said. It was not a question. Clara was quiet for a moment. Something flickered in her eyes that Aurora could not read. "No, sweetheart, it is not a hospital. Then where am I?" Before Clara could answer, Aurora's gaze drifted to the window. Through the slightly parted drapes, she saw a garden stretching out, perfectly trimmed rows of trees, a marble fountain, and farther away, a high wall lined with security cameras glinting in the sunlight. And she understood. This was not a hospital. This was a mansion, a prison covered in gold. Clara had just opened her mouth to answer when a knock sounded at the door. Not a polite knock, not a request. It was a notification, short, decisive, the kind of knock from someone who knew the door would open no matter what the answer was. The heavy oak door swung inward, and the man from the diner walked in. Aurora recognized him instantly, even though he looked nothing like he had that night. The perfect black suit was gone. Now he wore a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, the collar open. His hair was slightly tousled as if his hand had been through it too many times. Her as if she were the strangest creature he had ever seen, right before everything fell into chaos. "Clara, let us speak alone." His voice was velvet wrapped around steel, but something at the edges had softened, something weary. Clara nodded. She gave Aurora's hand a small squeeze, a quiet reassurance, then slipped out. The door closed with a soft click, and Aurora suddenly realized she was alone with the man she had dared challenge in a crowded diner. The man who, Lila had said, could kill her without blinking. "You are awake," he said, moving toward the window instead of toward the bed, keeping distance. "Where am I?" Aurora asked, flat and direct. "No circling." "My house." "Why?" "Because a hospital is not safe." He turned to look at her, one hand in his pocket. "And because you took a bullet for someone I intended to take. That is a debt I do not like to carry." Aurora wanted to laugh, but her chest hurt too much. "I did not ask you to owe me anything. You do not have to ask. A debt still exists." He tilted his head, studying her with cool curiosity. "Your rent has been paid for months. Your landlord was told you are recovering from an accident. And your job at the diner," he paused, "has been handled." Heat rushed into Aurora's face, not from shame, but from anger. "Handled. You paid my rent without asking. You interfered with my job without asking. Who do you think you are?" "Dario Rossi," he answered, steady as stone, "and I am the man keeping you alive." "I did not ask you to keep me alive. I did not ask anything from you." Aurora tried to sit up, even as pain screamed through her chest. "I want to go home." "No." One word, final, cold as ice. "You cannot keep me here. I can." Dario stepped closer, and even though he did not raise his voice, something in his eyes made Aurora fall silent. "Do you know who attacked the diner that night? They are Sergei Ivanov's men. Ivanov is my rival. He tried to kill me, and he is willing to kill anyone standing near me. And you brave, foolish girl, were seen with me. You were seen in my arms. You were brought to my house." He stopped at her bedside, close enough that Aurora could see the tension standing out along his neck. "In my world, that means you belong to me, and Ivanov will want to use you to hurt me." "I am just a waitress," Aurora said, her voice weaker than she hated. "I am nobody. You became somebody the moment you stepped between me and that table." Dario leaned down, and his storm-gray eyes burned into hers. "You stepped into a world you do not understand, Miss Reed, and now you cannot step out again." Silence. Heavy. Airless. Aurora could hear her own heart, could feel the weight of every word he had spoken pressing on her chest harder than the bullet ever had. "So I am your prisoner," she said, her voice shaking, but she did not look away. "You are my guest. Guests are not forbidden to leave. Smart guests know when to stay." Dario straightened, the space between them turning into an invisible wall. "Rest. Your wound needs time to heal. We will talk more when you are stronger." "I do not want to talk more. I want to go home." "Your home is not safe. That is not your decision. Now it is my decision." He turned and walked to the door. "Clara will take care of you. If you need anything, tell her." Dario. His name slipped from her lips before she could stop it. He paused, hand on the doorknob, but he did not turn around. "I do not belong to you," Aurora said, each word clear and firm. "I do not belong to anyone." Silence held for a heartbeat. 2. "We will see." Then he left. The door shut behind him, and Aurora understood that her gilded cage had just been locked one more time. Days passed before Aurora was allowed out of bed. Days of dull, constant pain every time she breathed. Days of painkillers that left her mind hazy and slow. Days of Clara coming in to change her dressings and check her wounds with the patience of a saint. And days of Dario Rossi disappearing as if their conversation had never happened. When Clara finally declared she was well enough to walk, Aurora almost sprang out of the bed. Even as pain protested, she needed to move. She needed to do something besides lie there staring at the ceiling and thinking about the gilded cage holding her. Slowly, sweetheart. Clara took her by the elbow and helped her out of the room. Your injuries are not fully healed. We are just doing a light little tour. A tour? As if this were a 5-star hotel instead of a prison. But Aurora did not complain. She needed to know where she was. She needed to know if there was an exit. Dario Rossi's estate was not simply a house. It was a world sealed off, self-contained. Clara led her through long corridors with gleaming marble floors, walls lined with paintings Aurora guessed were expensive antiques. They passed a living room the size of the entire first floor of an ordinary house, a dining room with an oak table that could seat many people, and then they reached a library that made Aurora stop. Bookshelves rose from floor to ceiling, packed with thousands of leather-bound volumes stamped in gold. Sliding brass ladders waited to reach the highest shelves. Late afternoon light filtered through stained glass windows, spilling bands of gold and red across the wooden floor. In another life, Aurora might have thought she had stepped into heaven. From the library, they went out into the garden, and if the inside of the estate had stunned her, the outside left her wordless. The ground stretched like a living architecture magazine. Flower beds trimmed into perfect geometric shapes. A white marble fountain, lush green hedges forming shaded walkways. Farther out, she saw a greenhouse filled with roses in every color, a pool of turquoise water sparkling under the sun, and a smaller building that Clara explained was the gym. Beautiful, perfect, and entirely a cage. Because Aurora saw other things too. Security cameras hidden in the trees, turning slowly like eyes that never blinked. Men in black suits patrolling the gravel paths with steady military steps, and the wall surrounding the entire property, high, its top glinting with something she guessed was barbed wire or electronic sensors. Beautiful, is it not? Clara asked, her voice gentle, her eyes knowing. Beautiful, Aurora agreed, and there is no way out. Clara did not answer. She only squeezed Aurora's hand and led her toward the gym. Physical therapy began the next day, and it was hell. Every movement that stretched her shoulder felt like a knife. Even the smallest exercises brought sweat to her skin and tears to the edge of her eyes. But Aurora gritted her teeth and endured. She had endured years with Harlan. She could endure this. It was during one of those sessions that she met Nico. He was one of the younger guards, with neatly cropped brown hair and unexpectedly warm brown eyes in a hard face. He had been assigned to stand watch outside the gym while she worked, and after days of silence, Aurora spoke first because she was going out of her mind from loneliness. "How long have you worked for Rossi?" she asked, struggling to lift her left arm above her head. "Years," Nico answered, his voice softer than she expected. "He saved my sister." Aurora paused and looked at him. Saved? She was taken, Nico said, his gaze darkening with memory. A trafficking ring. She was young. The police could not do anything or did not want to. I was desperate. I begged everywhere. He stopped and drew a breath. Then someone introduced me to Mr. Rossi. He did not ask for money. He did not ask for conditions. He only asked where she was, and he saved her. Within hours, Nico looked at Aurora, his sincerity almost painful. "The men who took my sister, they cannot hurt anyone anymore. And my sister is in college now. Boston, studying psychology." Aurora said nothing. She did not know what to say because that story did not fit the monster she had built in her mind. It did not fit the man who had threatened Lila in the diner that night, but it did not completely contradict him either. "Mr. Rossi is not a good man in the usual way," Nico said, as if he could read her thoughts. "But he has rules. No trafficking, no hurting children, no touching innocent people." Nico shrugged. "In this world, that is already more than most others." Aurora turned back to her exercises. The pain in her shoulder suddenly felt a little easier to bear. She did not believe Dario Rossi was good, but maybe, just maybe, he was not entirely a monster. For weeks, Aurora learned that Dario Rossi was a ghost in his own house. He rarely appeared. He left before dawn in a convoy of gleaming black SUVs, and he returned after midnight, when the entire estate had already fallen asleep. The times they happened to cross paths could be counted on one hand, and each encounter was so brief it was almost meaningless. One morning, she was eating breakfast in the small dining room when he passed by, stopped just long enough to ask, "How is the wound?" Then he disappeared through a door without waiting for her answer. One afternoon, she was in physical therapy when she caught a glimpse of him at the far end of the hallway, watching, and when their eyes met, he turned away, polite, distant, as if she were a guest he was obligated to host, but did not truly want. But Aurora was not stupid. She noticed the small things he probably did not think she would see. The way food she liked began appearing more often at the table, even though she had never told anyone. The way the books she lingered over in the library would be waiting on her bedside table at night. The way the security cameras inside the estate seemed to follow her, turning slowly when she walked past. He was watching her from far away through cold screens, but still watching. Aurora did not know how that made her feel. Safe, violated, or something in between that she did not dare name. That night, she could not sleep. Her shoulder ached with that dull, familiar pain, the kind no medication could fully touch, and her mind spun in circles. About her empty apartment out there, about her old life, the one she was no longer sure she even wanted back, about Harlan and the scars he had left behind on her body and inside her soul. When the clock struck late and sleep still refused to come, Aurora decided to go down to the library. At least there she could find something to read, instead of lying awake, counting imaginary cracks in the ceiling. At night, the estate was frighteningly quiet. Her footsteps echoed on marble floors, and every shadow felt like it was hiding a secret. She pushed open the library doors, expecting emptiness and the smell of old paper. Instead, she found light. A fire burned low in the fireplace, throwing dancing shadows along the walls, and in the leather armchair in front of the flames, Dario Rossi sat with a glass of whiskey in his hand, his gaze fixed on the fire as if it held answers to questions he could not bring himself to ask out loud. Aurora froze in the doorway. She should turn around, pretend she had seen nothing, go back to her room, but before she could move, he spoke without turning. "Cannot sleep." His voice was low and slightly rough, as if he had not spoken to anyone in a long time. "My shoulder hurts," Aurora answered, not knowing why she was being honest. "There's whiskey if you want it. Helps you sleep better than pills." She hesitated for a beat, then stepped inside and sat in the chair across from him. Dario poured a small amount and handed it to her without looking directly into her eyes. They sat in silence for a while, with only the soft crackle of the fire and the warm bite of whiskey in the air. "You read a lot," Dario said at last. "Clara says you finished an entire shelf. There is nothing else to do." Aurora shrugged, and the motion sent a sharp jolt through her shoulder. "This library is impressive. Have you read all of it?" "Most of it." He took a sip of whiskey. "Books are the only friends who do not betray you." The words were simple, but something in them made Aurora study him more closely. In the flicker of firelight, Dario Rossi no longer looked like a monster or a powerful mafia boss. He looked like a tired, lonely man drinking by himself in the middle of the night. "Loneliness is an old friend of mine," Aurora said, not knowing why she shared it. "I have lived with it for a long time." Dario finally looked at her. His gray eyes caught the firelight and held something she could not read. "You are different than I thought." "What did you think I was?" "I thought you would cry, beg, make a scene." His mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile. "Instead, you read. You do physical therapy, and you look at my cameras like you want to burn them down." Aurora could not stop the small laugh that escaped her. "I lived with a monster once. Compared to him, you are just a minor inconvenience." Something shifted in Dario's eyes. A flicker of curiosity, a flicker of something darker. But he did not ask, and she was grateful for that. They sat a little longer in silence, the strange kind that was not uncomfortable, that did not demand to be filled with pointless words, just two lonely people sharing the same room in the middle of the night. At last Dario stood. "You should sleep. Physical therapy tomorrow will not be easier if you stay up all night." He paused at the door, turned back for half a second. "Good night, Aurora." It was the first time he had spoken her name. And when the door closed, Aurora realized her heart was beating faster than normal. The sleepless nights in the library became an unspoken habit. Aurora did not always find Dario there, but when she did, they would sit in silence or trade a few brief remarks about the books on the shelves. No one mentioned the daytime. No one mentioned the world outside that warm room with the fireplace and the scent of old paper, as if late night created its own separate space where ordinary rules no longer existed. On one night, Dario was more drunk than usual. Aurora knew the moment she stepped in, from the whiskey glass in his hand, nearly empty, from the way his storm-gray eyes stared into the fire with a hollowness she had never seen before. She meant to turn around to give him privacy, but his voice cut through the dark. "Today is my sister's birthday." Aurora stopped. She had not known he had a sister. No one in this estate had ever mentioned her. Years old. Dario went on, his voice rough and far away. She would be that age today if she were still alive. Aurora slowly sat in the chair she had come to know, saying nothing, only waiting. Sometimes silence is the greatest gift we can offer another person. Dario poured more whiskey, then took a long drink as if he were trying to drown something. "Gabriella." He spoke the name as if it hurt him. "My sister was Gabriella. My mother died giving birth to her, so I practically raised her. My father was too busy with work. And I thought I could be her brother and her father and her mother." He let out a laugh, bitter, without joy. "I was wrong." "What happened?" Aurora asked gently. "She started using drugs when young." Dario set the glass down. He laced his fingers together and stared at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. "I did not know, or I did not want to know. I was too busy becoming what my father wanted me to be, too busy learning how to run this empire, too busy to notice my sister was dying right in front of me." Silence. Fire crackling. Somewhere in the estate, an old clock struck late. She overdosed when young. Dario's voice was frighteningly flat, as if he had told himself this story so many times it no longer had the power to make him cry. In the bathroom of her apartment alone, I was the one who found her. Aurora felt her heart tighten. She knew that feeling. The feeling of losing someone you should have protected. The guilt that eats from the inside like acid. She did not think. She did not weigh it. She simply reached across the space between their chairs and laid her hand over his. Dario went still. His whole body tightened like a wire pulled taut, as if her gentle touch were an electric shock. He looked down at her hand on his. Then he looked up at her face. And in that moment, Aurora saw something fracture behind those storm-gray eyes. Not weakness. Fear. Fear of softness. Fear of letting anyone see the cracks beneath the armor. "That was not your fault," Aurora said softly. "She made her own choices. You cannot save someone who does not want to be saved. You do not understand." Dario yanked his hand away abrupt and stood. He moved back as if she were fire and he had just been burned. "I should have been there. I should have noticed. I was her brother and I should have realized my husband was a monster before I married him." Aurora answered, her voice calm. "But sometimes we do not see what is right in front of us because we are too busy looking at what we want to see." Dario stopped, his back still to her. His shoulders were rigid, his breathing heavy. Aurora thought he would speak. "It is late." Then he walked out of the 1990s. "It is late." Then he walked out of the library. The door slammed behind him like a declaration. Aurora stayed where she was, alone beside the dying fire, staring at the whiskey glass he had left behind. and she wondered how many walls a person had to build to protect themselves from pain, and whether those walls in the end became a prison of their own. After that night in the library, Dario disappeared completely. No more accidental encounters in the hallways. No more late nights by the fireplace. Nothing left but absence echoing through every corner of the estate. Aurora told herself she did not care, that his distance was a good thing, a reminder that she did not belong here, that she was only a prisoner waiting to be released. But at night, when she lay alone in the cold luxury of her room, she could not stop thinking about his eyes when he spoke of Gabriella, about the way he recoiled when she touched his hand, like a wild animal that had forgotten what it felt like to be stroked. Days later, Aurora was walking through the estate when she heard voices. By now, she had explored most of the house, partly to kill time, partly to search for an escape route she knew did not exist. Today, she drifted toward the east wing, a place she had never set foot in, and there she heard them. The sound carried through a heavy oak door left slightly ajar. Two men arguing, just loud enough that she could catch every word. You cannot keep her here forever. The first voice was rough, sharp with impatience. The voice of a man who had run out of patience. The families are asking questions. They want to know who she is, why you are protecting her, what value she has. That is not their concern, Dario. Aurora recognized his voice at once, cold and sharp as steel. It is their concern when it affects the alliance. The other man shot back. She is a liability. Dario, a waitress no one has ever heard of, no strategic value, no family connections. Ivanov is using her to distract you. And you are letting him win. Enzo. Dario's voice turned so dangerous, Aurora felt a chill crawl up her spine even from where she stood. She took a bullet for a child she did not even know. She stood up to me when no one in that room dared breathe too hard. She is not a liability. Then what is she? The other man snapped. How do you plan to explain her to the families? Silence. Then Dario spoke, and his voice carried something Aurora had never heard from him before. Not coldness, not control. A pure warning, the kind that froze the blood in her veins. Anyone who touches her dies. That is all the families need to know. Dario, you cannot get out. Enzo, we will talk later. Heavy footsteps. Too late. Aurora realized she needed to move, needed to leave before she was discovered, but her feet felt nailed to the floor, and before she could react, the door swung wide. Enzo stood there, a man in his 40s, hair threaded with gray, angular face, black eyes cold as stone. He looked at her with undisguised contempt, lips pressed into a hard line. Eavesdropping, he snorted, typical. Then he brushed past her, his footsteps echoing on the marble until he disappeared around the corner of the hallway. Aurora stood there, heart hammering, not sure whether to run or to face what came next. The answer came when Dario's voice sounded from inside the room. Come in, Aurora. Not a request, a command. She drew a deep breath and stepped over the threshold. Dario's office was unlike any room she had seen in the estate. No extravagant display, no antiques, no expensive paintings, only modern practical lines, and one wall filled with security monitors showing feeds from dozens of cameras across the property. Dario stood behind a massive black wooden desk, arms folded, storm-gray eyes fixed on her with an expression she could not read. How much did you hear? Aurora chose honesty. There was no point lying when he could watch everything she did through those screens. Enough to know I am a liability, and enough to know someone wants me dead. Dario did not react. Not a blink, not a frown, only silence. Long and heavy. Ivanov, he said at last. Sergei Ivanov. He is the one behind the attack at the diner, and he will not stop until he gets you. Why? I am just a waitress. Because you were seen with me. Because I saved you. In this world, that means something. Dario came out from behind the desk, stopping closer to her. Ivanov wants to hurt me, and he thinks you are the way to do it. So, what am I supposed to do? Stay here forever like a prisoner? No. Dario paused, and for the first time since she met him, Aurora saw something like hesitation pass through those gray eyes. There is a way. The only way you will truly be safe. What way? You need to marry me. Time stopped. Aurora was sure she had misheard. She waited for Dario to laugh, to tell her it was a joke, but his face was stone serious. You are insane, she said, springing to her feet. You are completely out of your mind. Sit down, Aurora. I'm not sitting down. You just asked me to marry you like you were offering me a business contract, because that is exactly what this is. Dario did not raise his voice. He did not move. His calmness only made her angrier. In my world, there are unwritten laws, rules that even men like Ivanov have to follow. And one of those rules is this: a boss's wife is untouchable. Aurora froze mid-step. Untouchable. If you are my wife, you become family, and family is sacred. Dario straightened and walked toward her. Anyone who touches you will not only face me, they will face every allied family I have. That is protection no money can buy, no wall can build. And you expect me to believe you are doing this out of kindness. Aurora folded her arms, fighting to keep her voice from shaking. What do you really want from me? Nothing. Dario stopped one step away, close enough that she could see the tiny gold flecks scattered through his gray eyes. This is temporary. When the threat from Ivanov is over, when everything is safe, we will annul it. You can leave with enough money to start your life over anywhere you want, a new identity if you need it. A completely new beginning. And in the meantime, I have to play your devoted wife. You have to appear with me at important events. You have to live here. You have to wear a wedding ring. Dario tilted his head. But that is all. Nothing else. Aurora clenched her jaw. I have conditions. Say them. Separate rooms. I do not sleep in the same room as you. Agreed. Freedom to move around the house, not watched like a criminal, within safety limits. Agreed. And no one forces me to do anything. Aurora met his eyes, her voice like steel. Anything. I am not property. I am not decoration. This is an agreement, not slavery. Something flashed in Dario's eyes. Surprise. Maybe respect. Agreed. He said softer. Everything you asked for. I agree to. Aurora did not answer. She turned and walked to the door, needing air, needing space to think. You have until tomorrow morning, Dario called after her. After that, I need an answer. She did not look back, did not speak. She only walked out through the endless hallways, up the stairs, into her room, shut the door, and leaned her back against it as if the wood could keep the outside world from getting in. Marriage to a Mafia boss. She, Aurora Reed, a night shift diner waitress who had fled a violent marriage only to fall into another one with a man 1,000 times more dangerous. This was madness. Complete madness. But when she lay in bed that night, staring up at the ornate ceiling she now knew down to every line, she thought about her options. Go back to her old apartment and wait for Ivanov to find her. Run and live in fear for the rest of her life. Or accept this insane offer and have a chance, however small, to be truly free one day. She thought about Dario, about the way he spoke of Gabriella with pain he could not hide, about the way he pulled back when she touched his hand like a wild animal afraid of tenderness, about the way he said, anyone who touches her dies with a certainty that held not a flicker of doubt. He was not a good man. She knew that. But maybe, just maybe, he was not entirely the monster she once thought he was. When dawn finally leaked through the curtains, Aurora had her answer. She stood outside Dario's office in the morning and knocked 3 short times. The door opened, and he was there, still in the clothes from the night before. The dark circles under his eyes told her he had not slept either. I have an additional condition, Aurora said, instead of greeting him. Dario tilted his head, waiting. When this is over, you let me go. No questions, no conditions. You let me disappear if that is what I want. Silence. Then Dario nodded slow and final. Fine. Then Aurora drew a deep breath, feeling like she was stepping off a cliff into a bottomless void. I agree. Days passed. Aurora had days to prepare for a wedding to a man she had first met less than a month ago in a grimy diner in the dead of night. Days to transform from an anonymous waitress into the wife of one of the most powerful mafia bosses on the East Coast of the United States. It felt like she was living inside a movie about someone else's life, and Aurora was the stunt double who did not know her lines. On the first day, they took her to buy a wedding dress. Not alone, of course. Black SUVs, bodyguards, and a convoy that escorted her to a high-end boutique in Manhattan. Aurora had never even heard of the kind of place with no price tags, because if you have to ask, you cannot afford it. The entire store was closed for her. The salespeople bowed as if she were royalty, and Aurora stood in the middle of a sea of silk and lace, not knowing what she was doing there. In the end, she chose a simple dress, ivory silk, with delicate lace straps along the sleeves and back. Not because she loved it, because she was too exhausted to try on anything else. She did not look in the mirror when they fitted it on her. She did not want to see the bride in that reflection. Clara became her lifeline in those chaotic days. The Irish woman with red hair threaded with silver and knowing green eyes always seemed to understand when to speak and when to stay quiet. She helped Aurora choose flowers, choose a hairstyle, choose jewelry, and more than anything, she sat beside Aurora each night when sleep would not come, bringing hot tea and a steady, peaceful presence that asked for no explanations. "You are terrified, are you not?" Clara asked on one night when they sat in Aurora's room with cups of tea gone cold. "I do not know what I feel," Aurora admitted. "I am afraid." "Yes, but there is something else, too. Something I am afraid to name." Clara only nodded. She did not ask for more, and Aurora was grateful for that. The night before the wedding, Aurora could not sleep. She tossed for hours, then gave up, slipped on a silk robe, and stood by the window, looking out at the garden drowned in darkness. A thin crescent moon hung in the sky, spilling silver light over the trees and the silent fountain. Beautiful, peaceful, and completely fake, just like everything else in her new life. A soft knock startled her. When she opened the door, Dario stood there in everyday clothes, a black shirt with the collar unbuttoned, his hair slightly disheveled, as if he had not been able to sleep either. In his hand was a small black velvet box. "Am I disturbing you?" he asked, and there was something in his voice that was different from usual, softer, less controlled. "I cannot sleep," Aurora said. Opening the door a little wider, Dario did not step inside. He only stood there looking at her for a long moment as if searching her face for something he could not quite name. Then he held the box out to her. "This belonged to my mother," he said as Aurora took it, her fingers trembling slightly as she lifted the lid. Inside was an exquisite white gold bracelet set with small emeralds arranged like leaves. It was not flashy, not ostentatious, just beautiful in a classic, timeless way. She wore it on her wedding day. Dario continued, his voice lowering, "And she told me that one day I should give it to the woman I marry." Aurora looked up at him, not knowing what to say. This was not what she expected, not from him. "For luck," Dario said, and before she could react, he turned and walked away, his tall figure dissolving into the darkness of the hallway as if he had never been there at all. Aurora stood there for a long time, staring at the bracelet in her hand, then at the shadows where Dario had disappeared, and she wondered whether all of this was only an arrangement or whether behind the walls Dario had built there was something more. That morning, Aurora stood before the large mirror in her room and did not recognize the woman looking back at her. The ivory silk dress hugged her body as if it had been made for her alone. Delicate lace straps and panels disguised the scar on her shoulder where the bullet had gone through. Her hair was swept up with small curls spilling softly along her cheekbones. Clara had spent time on her makeup, light, natural, just enough to bring out Aurora's green eyes and hide the shadows beneath them from too many sleepless nights. She looked beautiful. For the first time in her life, Aurora truly thought she was beautiful, but she did not feel like a bride. She felt like an actress in a play, one who did not know her lines. "It is time, sweetheart," Clara said gently, giving Aurora's hand a small, encouraging squeeze. Aurora nodded, swallowed hard, and stepped out of the room. The garden had been transformed completely for the ceremony. A massive arch of white roses stood at the end of a petal-strewn aisle. On either side, neat rows of white chairs had been set for guests, strangers, all dressed in expensive clothes, all wearing the sharp appraising gaze of predators. Mafia families. The people Dario needed to convince that this marriage was real. Aurora paused at the head of the aisle, and a bitter truth rose in her throat. Something she had tried not to think about. She would walk alone. No father waiting to take her arm. No mother crying happy tears in the front row. No friends smiling encouragement. Only her, alone, stepping into a manufactured marriage with a man she had met less than a month ago. She drew a deep breath, lifted her chin, and began to walk. Each step echoed in the silence. She could feel pairs of eyes measuring her, weighing her, wondering who she was and why Dario Rossi had chosen her. She did not look at them. She looked straight ahead to where Dario waited beneath the rose arch, and her heart missed a beat. He wore a black tuxedo, tailored so perfectly it seemed carved to the lines of his tall, powerful frame. His dark hair was slicked back neatly, sharpening the cut of his jaw and drawing attention to the storm-gray eyes fixed on her with an intensity that almost made her stumble. He was breathtaking, not the soft, pleasant kind of beauty, dangerous beauty, sharp-edged, the kind that made you want to run and at the same time made it impossible to look away. Aurora reached him, and Dario held out his hand. She placed her hand in his, felt her fingers trembling, and prayed he would not notice, but he did. She knew he did because his fingers tightened around hers just slightly, a small gesture no one else could see, as if he were saying, "I am here, you are not alone." The officiant began to speak. Familiar words about marriage, about commitment, about love and respect. Aurora barely heard any of it. All she could focus on was the warmth of Dario's hand, the clean, expensive scent of his cologne, the frantic rhythm of her heart inside her ribs. Dario Alessandro Rossi. Do you take this woman to be your wife, to love and to honor her in sickness and in health until death parts you? Dario looked straight into her eyes as he answered, his voice steady without a flicker of doubt. I do. Aurora Grace Reed, do you take this man to be your husband, to love and to honor him in sickness and in health until death parts you? She opened her mouth, but for a moment no sound came. She thought of Harlan, of her first marriage, of vows betrayed, of scars that never fully faded. She thought of her old life, the filthy apartment, the job with no future. And she thought of Dario, the mysterious man with sorrowful eyes, the man who had grieved in the dark for the sister he lost, the man who had placed his mother's bracelet in her hands like a wish for luck. I do. Her voice shook, but it was clear. I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. The entire garden went still. Pairs of eyes locked onto them. Dario turned toward her, and Aurora saw a flicker of hesitation in those gray eyes. A silent question. Then he leaned down and kissed her. It was brief, gentle. His lips touched hers for only a few seconds, just long enough to satisfy the watching guests, just long enough to complete the ritual. But in those few seconds, something moved through her, like electricity, like fire, as if a part of her had suddenly awakened after a long sleep. When Dario pulled back, his eyes were slightly wider, as if he had felt it too, something he had not expected. They looked at each other for 1 second, then two, while polite applause rose around them, and Aurora knew in that moment that the arrangement between them had just become far more complicated. The grand hall of the estate had been transformed into a fairy tale world so lavish it bordered on the unreal. Thousands of candles burned beside enormous crystal chandeliers, bathing the room in warm golden light that shimmered over expensive suits and glittering evening gowns. In one corner, a live orchestra played classical waltzes, the violins weaving through laughter, conversation, and the soft clink of champagne flutes. Banquet tables, draped in immaculate white linen, overflowed with fresh flowers and dishes. Aurora didn't even know the names of the kind of food meant for people who were born rich. Aurora sat beside Dario at the head table, his mother's emerald bracelet glittering at her wrist, the weight of a diamond wedding ring heavy on her finger. She smiled at guests who came to offer congratulations, nodded at compliments she knew were hollow, and tried not to let anyone see how hard her heart was pounding beneath the ivory silk. Playing the happy bride, it turned out, was more exhausting than an overnight shift at the Blue Moon. "You're shaking." Dario tilted his head toward her, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I'm fine." "You're not fine, but you're doing very well." "You stole—" before Aurora could answer. A voice cut through their exchange, a voice that made Dario go rigid at her side. "Dario Rossi, congratulations." Aurora looked up and saw her nightmare walking toward them in the flesh. Sergei Ivanov was a man in his later years, tall and lean with silver-white hair combed flawlessly back and an expensive charcoal gray suit. At a glance, he could have been a successful businessman or a seasoned politician, but his eyes betrayed everything. Pale blue and ice cold. They held no warmth, no humanity, snake eyes assessing prey. Dario. Dario rose to his feet, his tone flat as water before a storm. "I don't remember sending you an invitation." "Oh, Dario, we've been colleagues for a long time. How could I not come to congratulate you on your big day?" Ivanov smiled, but the smile never reached his eyes. Then those poisonous eyes slid to Aurora, and she felt as if she'd been plunged into ice water. "And this must be the beautiful bride I've heard so much about. Aurora Reed." "Oh, excuse me. Aurora Rossi now, isn't it?" He stepped closer, and Aurora felt Dario shift nearer, a wall at her side. Ivanov stopped in front of her and tilted his head, studying her with a fascination that made her skin crawl. "How interesting," he drawled, each word slow, venomous. "A plain little diner waitress suddenly becomes Mrs. Rossi. You must have something very special about you, dear." "Thank you for the compliment," Aurora said, surprised that her voice didn't tremble. "I assume what's special about me isn't your business." One eyebrow lifted, surprise flickering across Ivanov's face before it vanished. "Bold. I like that." He leaned in one step closer, his voice dropping into a whisper meant only for the three of them. "But I wonder, Mrs. Rossi, in this game, are you a pawn or a queen?" Aurora held his gaze. No blinking, no shaking, no retreat. She had lived with a monster before. She had counted tiles on the bathroom floor while waiting for Harlan's rage to pass. She had learned to hide fear until it became instinct. "I'm whatever I need to be," she replied, calm as if discussing the weather. "And you're whatever my husband allows you to be here. This is my wedding, not your negotiating table." Ivanov went silent. 1 second, 2. Then he laughed, cold, humorless. "Oh, Dario, you found yourself an interesting one. Anyone? And now you've offered your congratulations." Dario stepped level with Aurora, his voice steel. "I'm sure you have other things to do. Don't let us keep you." It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. And Ivanov, no matter how dangerous he was, understood lines. This was Dario's territory, Dario's wedding, and pairs of eyes were watching every move. Of course, Ivanov inclined his head, the serpent smile still on his mouth. "Enjoy tonight, Mr. and Mrs. Rossi. We'll be seeing each other again." He turned and walked away, dissolving into the crowd as if he'd never been there at all. Aurora didn't realize she'd been holding her breath until Ivanov disappeared completely. She exhaled, her knees suddenly weak, and sank back into her chair harder than she meant to. Under the table, where no one could see, Dario's hand found hers. His fingers threaded through hers, warm and steady, an anchor in the storm that had just passed. "You did well," he murmured. And his voice was different now. Not cold, not controlled, but edged with something that felt like respect. "You did better than anyone I've ever seen." Aurora didn't answer. She only tightened her grip on his hand, and they sat there in silence, two strangers who had just become husband and wife, facing an enemy they both knew would not stop until he got what he wanted. The party at the Moretti family's house went on until late, and when they returned to the estate, both Aurora and Dario were a little drunk. Champagne had been flowing all night, and Aurora had drunk more than usual to cope with the probing eyes and the roundabout questions from the other Mafia wives. Did she really love Dario? How had they met? Did she know who he was?